Okay, I'm just giving this a few minutes because it skips in the beginning. So I'll probably wait till 20 seconds in. I'm at 10 seconds now. Okay. Snap. Whew, excuse me. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Winners find a way. Snap. And the number 2 pencil splintered in his fist. Drats, Onyx whispered to himself. He only had one more word to go in what was considered the Valley's most challenging word puzzle, to wit, the wondrous word section in the Metro Moon newspaper. Now then, the wondrous words game, why, it most certainly wasn't an MTL competition, though it was nevertheless a game that had never been beaten, and thus Onyx, undoubtedly given who and what he was, had a burning sensation within to overthrow the game, to defeat it, and to do so at almost any cost. Beat the unbeatable, do the undoable, he thought to himself. He had an inkling suspicion as to what the missing word might be. 7 letters long, vertical, and the word purportedly started with the letter F and ended with the letter M. Holding the business end of the pencil nub, he steadied his hand, easing the pencil to the black and gray paper. He wrote the letter F first in the top box, followed by an R in the second box, then the letter E in the third box, skipping the fourth box entirely. He followed up with the fifth, sixth, and seventh boxes by writing D-O-M in them. Back to the empty box. He gawked at it silent and gulped. He didn't have the gumption to do it, quite frankly. To do it needed to be done. To do it was right. He scoffed, snapping the paper and dropping it, clearly annoyed. He glanced around the waiting room instead. Black mirror walls and a low-hanging ceiling, sofas and chairs scattered throughout, plenty of middle-aged men milling around, reading their books, papers, magazines, you name it. Anything they can do to get their minds off the inevitable doctor's visit to come, thought Onyx to himself. He sighed, bouncing his leg like a nervous rabbit, checking his wristwatch, tugging his collar, glancing back to the paper, staring at the empty box, thinking to himself what a coward he was, rocking in his seat, practically hugging himself. Win the orb, win the orb, win the orb, continued he, thinking. He reached into his pocket and fished out his coin of accomplishment, rolling and slipping the wretched thing between his fingers, grinning at it half-heartedly, before a voice suddenly spoke from the miniature screen impressed on the wall behind him. Merry Monday, Metroland, cried Tom Dibble's cocky young voice. Onyx spun to the screen and scoffed. Dibble, that fool, thought Onyx to himself, staring at Dibble's handsome tan face. Big news today, huh, Tom? Said Jazzy Jackson, wearing a fitted black dress, sitting next to Tom. Oh, big day for certain, Jazzy, replied Tom, and a big day especially for Metroland's very own Captain Kevin Ace, Onyx groaned, while everyone else in the waiting room, for some reason unbeknownst to him, dropped what they were doing and whipped to the screen. That's right, Metroland, Tom continued. Captain Kevin Ace, Metroland's most accomplished minder, captain of the MM, finally winning his 197th MTL competition yesterday, finally surpassing the late, great Don Shadow's record. Wow, that's a pretty big accomplishment, commented Jazzy. You're certainly right about that, Jazzy, replied Tom. Captain Ace has only 2 more wars to go before he's eligible for the city's sole major, Tom added. Onyx scoffed, but so did Jazzy. But tell us, Tom, how does one win the orb? How does one win the major? Said she. Tom shrugged. Can't say for certain, Tom replied. Because we all know now that winning all the general awards won't be sufficient to win you the major, Tom explained. I'll say we had to learn that lesson the hard way, she said. Right you are, Jazzy. Or actually, Mr. Onyx Brooks had to learn that lesson for us, he responded, chuckling. But tell us, Tom, Jazzy continued, if winning the generals doesn't win us the major, then how do we do it? Tom smirked. Can't say myself, but maybe our special guest this morning may be able to shed some insight on that very answer, he said. Oh, goody. Suddenly the screen shut off, and a lazy voice spoke over the waiting room's loudspeaker. Number 331, please. Report to the front desk for check-in, please. Thank you. He gulped, gazing at the other men scrambling and checking their numbers, though Onyx knew all too well his own. He didn't bother checking, and instead he stood, strong and powerful in his lanky stride across the waiting room, making his way to the check-in desk, getting plenty of gloomy looks along the way. As if I had been sentenced to execution or something, he thought to himself, tugging his collar. He rocked up to the check-in desk, coughed, clearing his throat. I'm number 331, spouted the young, petite, blonde-haired woman sitting behind the desk, inspecting the paper he had given her before she glanced up. She went slack-jawed and froze all of a sudden. Holy shit, you're Mr. Metro, she said, gasping. He nodded, glancing up and to his right, noticing the fat purple sphere lingering in the corner. He snarled at it before drawing his attention back to Katie Morlang. It's nice to meet you, sir. He bowed at her. Pleasure meeting you, Katie. I'm super sorry we kept you waiting. Ma, that's quite all right. I'm in no hurry. Please, come around. Follow me, and I'll take you back. He marched stiffly around her desk, following Katie into the labyrinth of halls. They zigged left first, then zagged right, zigging left one time when they should have zagged right. Oops, sorry about that. I'm new around here, said Katie, blushing. Eventually, however, they arrived at the patient room, Z1. Katie instructed Onyx to take a seat on the examination table while she got things ready. He gulped, tugging his collar. Things? He said. What kind of things? He continued. Oh, just making sure the doctor uses the right kind of lube and stuff. Lube? He replied. Yeah, lubricant, so the doctor can just slip right on in there without a problem. He cringed, tugging his collar. Dr. Felcher can get pretty anal about that stuff, she continued. Oh, haha, well, you look at that. I just made it funny. He chuckled nervously at her as she twirled back to the countertop. So, Mr. Brooks, is this your first third eye exam? She said. He gulped. Yes, it is, thank you. Great, she exclaimed, spinning back to him, her hands wrapped in blue surgical gloves as she continued. Dr. Felcher absolutely loves first-timers. Ma, he does he? Oh, yeah, she continued. Onyx's pale face flushed green. He likes the sound that it makes, when it's your very first fitting, she elaborated. It's so tight and stuff the first time that Dr. Felcher can hardly even fit. A knocking at the door interrupted her. Knock, knock, said a voice coming in. Oh, there he is. The door slowly creaked open, and in slithered a short, pale, and saggy-looking man who had dark-socketed eyes, and whose appearance resembled that more of a mortician than a doctor. Onyx Brooks, pleasure to finally meet you. The name is Dr. Felcher, said the gurgly-voiced Dr. Felcher. At once, Onyx sprung from the tabletop. Stretching tall, ballooning his chest out, bouncing his chin up. Dr. Felcher, he said boisterously, I have cancer. Like he backed him and sucked the air out the room. Oh, Keepers, you're one of those, are you? Said the doctor. I beg your pardon. Keepers Christ, you don't have cancer, Mr. Brooks. I do so. I've been urinating funny for weeks now. Oh, Keepers. Katie, mark this one down as a hippie hypo case, will you? She clapped excitedly. Oh, goody, my first one. Doctor, please, spouted Owen. Mr. Brooks, I'm telling you, you're fine. I say, how would you know? You haven't so much as examined me yet. Because, Mr. Brooks, you're 35 years old, son, and you look to be in pretty damn good shape. I can tell there ain't nothing wrong with you. Yes, I understand, replied Onyx, sitting back to the table. If you understand, then what are you doing here? Said the wrinkly doctor. Onyx sniffed. I simply cannot risk it, doctor, he said. Risk what? I still have far too much to accomplish in my life, he continued. I can't take any risks, such as getting sick, until my purpose is completed. Dr. Felcher chuckled. You sure? Don't be threatening me with a good time now, Mr. Brooks, replied the doctor. Onyx sighed. I'm sure, he whimpered. Ha-ha, laughed Dr. Felcher, dastardly raising a hand and snapping a glove on it. Stand up, bend over, and drop your pants down, son, the doctor ordered. Onyx gulped. Oh, okay, all right, he said softly. He gingerly slid off the tabletop, doing as the sly doctor instructed. That's it, nice and easy now, said the doctor. Like this, replied Onyx. Yep, just like that. All right, now bend over that way and put your belly on the table. Like this? Yep, that's perfect. What do I do now? Inquired Onyx, nervously glancing back. Spread them, replied the doctor. My legs? They're already... I'm not talking about your legs, son. Oh, replied Onyx sheepishly. There you go. Perfect. Absolutely beautiful, said the doctor, clapping. Now, at first, it's going to feel like you're taking a giant shit, continued the doctor. Ma, that doesn't sound so. But then, well, things are going to start getting kind of weird deep inside you. Onyx perked up. Weird? Deep inside me? What do you mean? He said, glancing back in a panic. Lube me up, Katie, cried the doctor merrily. Hee, she replied like a zany scientist squeezing a tube to the doctor's fingers. Splooch, splurch. My gracious, whispered Onyx under his breath, bearing his face to the table. Get those goggles down, Katie. Goggles down, sure, she replied. All right then, Brooks, pucker up. We're going in, exclaimed the doctor. Splotch. Keepers, squeaked Onyx, rearing up. 300 prish, and a half hour later, he was well on his way out the doctor's office, getting far away from that place as he possibly could. He was having a rather good day, actually, all things considered, strolling south down the neon-soaked strip of Metro Maine. A dark morning sky parachuting high above, the divider building to his left. He dashed across the face of it. Crossing the street, a towering skyscraper nestled between two others stood before him now. The skyscraper had the words, Keeper's House of Records, bannering over its front double doors. He slipped inside the building, streets outside, meanwhile, becoming clustered by busybodies. Like a fast rising tide to the shore, streams of colored people done up in their colorful suits and flashy dresses, scrambling like high school students between class. By the time Onyx came back out the records building, however, the streets again hauntingly empty, but for a few sad spirits standing about. Onyx folded the paper he had gotten from the records building, and he tucked the paper to his breast pocket, glancing to his left, glancing to his right, and at the miners across the way, pot-bellied, burly, strong miners wearing tight powder blue uniforms, loitering like human-sized bullfrogs on the corner. Onyx was so busy eyeing the miners, mind you, that he hopped at the sound of the all-too-familiar voice calling for him down the way. Hoy, hoy, Mr. Brooks! He swung to the voice. A plump young fellow who had a white, doughy face, and whose general appearance strongly resembled that of a waddling bag of milk, trotting up the street towards Onyx. Onyx's eyes like narrow slits as he smiled at the fellow. Ah, Dr. Carl, pleasure seeing you again, my young friend, said Onyx kindly and mature. Ho, likewise, Mr. Brooks, likewise. It's been many months now, hasn't it? Replied Dr. Carl in a happy and light and almost Swedish-sounding voice. Indeed it has, Doctor. How's life been for you? I've heard you're the new #1 engineer in Metroland now. Dr. Carl's fat cheeks shaded pink. I'm just trying to be more like you, Mr. Brooks. Yes, well, I've never been an engineer, so. Dr. Carl snickered, snooting. Good one, Mr. Brooks, while Onyx's brow arched. The two acquaintances continued chopping it up on the sidewalk for a bit before the unthinkable happened. Kaboom! An explosion of smoke from down the street, following by a woman's blood-curdling scream. Down with the keepers! Down with them! Down! Onyx watched in horror as the woman's collar glowed to a blistering bright red. Freedom! We want freedom! She screamed, clawing her face. Boo! Sirens began wailing in the air. No, no! Cried the woman. Onyx gasped, stumbling back, for he had never seen a code violation take place in real time before. He noticed Dr. Carl already scuttling off in the opposite direction. Onyx spun back to the woman, sirens blaring louder and louder, like an opera singer who simply wouldn't stop. He slapped both hands to his ears as the young woman screamed, "Freedom!" Miners across the street barreling down the block after her. She dashed around the corner, leaving behind her a cloud of black smoke, sirens falling away, following the cursed woman wherever she could go, before the sirens suddenly cut silent. Nothing but a breeze down the street. Onyx shivered, tugging his collar. Certainly not wasting any more time lollygagging around, he power walked southbound in a hurry, juxtaposed to the black cloud across the street. He glanced at the cloud. The woman had set off a bomb, he realized. A powerful, deadly bomb, too, he thought to himself. Although a bomb that didn't so much as fracture the black mirrored glass around it, as if anything actually could, continued he. He hastened his pace, and in distant view, at the end of the metro main strip, loomed the infamous Spectrum Tower building. Like a deathly dark tower standing wickedly in the night, Spectrum Tower stood simply black, free from any festering neon cords. It was indeed the darkest, loneliest, and most sought-after building in all the city, though it was also home to Onyx's office as he opened the building's doors and dashed inside. A grand black mirror lobby before him. He stood between two thick black glass pillars on the edge of the lobby's gaping perimeter. Nothing but a vacant, shadowy jade space. A space practically howling at him. It stood so empty. He zipped across it, reaching the back wall in almost record time. He stepped in an elevator and went up. "Floor 200, please," said the elevator voice. He stepped off, striding across a far quainter and friendlier-looking lobby, into his office suite, where his secretary, Bertha Hammerstone, a round, blonde-haired woman who had been appointed Onyx's secretary by the city, greeted him in her usually warm gesture. "Spiffy," she said in her thumpingly deep voice, flashing her sarcastic half smile at him. "Where the hell you been, you dummy? Work started 3 hours ago," she continued. "Yes, Bertha, I'm well aware. Thank you." "Caw, what happened? You look terrible," he scoffed. "Nothing happened to me, Bertha," he replied, striding past her. "Hey, where you going?" she called. "My office. Where would you think?" "Your office? What are you going to do back there?" Stopping, scoffing. "Bothered you would ask such a thing." "Think about it," he replied. She scoffed him down the hall. "Now, if you excuse me, I have some work to get done," continued he. "Oh, now he wants to work," mumbled she, though he knew she intentionally mumbled loud enough for him to hear. "Bertha, Bertha, Bertha," he said to himself under his breath, annoyed. He reached the end of the wall, and therefore the back wall. He reached the end of the hall, and therefore the back wall. Opening his office door, he stepped into his office, and why, he felt like a pea dropped into a shadowy fishbowl all of a sudden, confronted by a hollow and empty space that was his kingly office. Like a sorry shadow, he drug his feet to a heavy oak desk, dropping to his seat behind the desk, glancing around some. Two bowing black mirror walls on either side of him, walls bending outwardly like tops of hourglasses, holding the ceiling 4 stories high off the ground. He glanced to his right. The once glittering curtain of magnificent medals and trophies resting upon his wall-sized bookshelf, now dulled and matted in shadows like a long, drawn-out sigh. He perked up, suddenly recalling something, slapping his breast pocket, fishing out the paper, unfolding it, laddering his finger up and down the paper, reading over its list, though eyeing nothing but good news. He smirked. "Aha! Just as I suspected." Hinging up from his desk, reaching for his phone, pressing a button on it, speaking to a speaker. "Bertha, call Bruce Bonestill's office at once. Tell him to send Bruce down to my office, immediately." He paused for a moment. "Bertha?" he whispered, scuffling from the other end. Before. "What's the magic word, Spiffy?" she said. He held his breath, pulling back, puckering his lips, doing his best not to snap. "Please," he said through grinding teeth. She chuckled and hung up. "Drats, you've got to be kidding me," he exclaimed. He launched up from the seat, cursing under his breath and marching determined across his office. He stepped out the office, only to reemerge two moments later. This time, however, he was carrying something clunky and brown, an accordion file, one that had dozens of papers dazing out of it. He staggered across the office, holding the file in the same way he would a heavy boulder across his chest, dropping the file to his desk. Fadump. Phew! Falling to his seat. The file had the words Colt Conway scribbled in the black letters across his barren brown face. He waited before digging through the file, and he decided it most efficient to wait until Bruce had arrived. That way the two friends could prepare together, and things would be more fun that way. Much to his surprise, Bruce showed up to the office rather quick, sitting stuffed in the round blackened seat in front of Onyx's desk. "I reckon I don't recall seeing any sky sign saying that before, Brooksy," said Bruce. "You don't? Are you certain?" "Well, wait a darn minute now," continued Bruce. "Did you say the sign said, 'Do boldly what none have ever done, and you shall be rewarded'?" Onyx grinned, nodding. "Nope, haven't seen it," Bruce announced. Onyx's face flopped. Well, maybe I shall just get to my point then," he said, breathy. "Let's talk about winning the Conway trial, shall we?" Bruce snickered and shrugged, while Onyx began shuffling through the Conway file merrily, happily plucking out a paper from it, joyously slapping the paper to the desk before Bruce's foul mouth opened up again. "You ain't going to beat the city, pard," Onyx scoffed. "And why would you say such a thing?" snapped Onyx sternly, his face sunk narrow and glaring. "Because you ain't." "My, do you have some magic powers or something that you're not sharing with me, Bruce?" Bruce scoffed. "I reckon I got me 25 some odd key trials under my belt." Onyx rolled his eyes. "My, well, if that's your magic, then I'm quite uninterested." "Ain't got to be interested, Brooksy. I reckon a fact is a fact." Onyx scoffed. "Your prediction of an absolute future, Bruce, is a farce, far from any fact, my friend, aside from the fact being your own speculation and extrapolation." Bruce scoffed at him. "Yeah, tell it to the judge, Brooksy." I say, replied Onyx, swatting the desk. You're acting like this trial isn't a big deal, like it has no impact important to us. Ain't that important to me, Brooksy, replied Bruce. Onyx scoffed, crossing his arms. I got bigger trials on my plate, and ain't no key trials one of them. Bigger trials, such as, Bruce scoffed, such as Bonnie and me's big dinner tonight. Onyx reared back. Your dinner? Replied he, dipping his chin at Bruce, gawking at Bruce like, really? Dadgum right, our dinner. Tonight. Tonight's our 10-year anniversary. He sat back, rolling his eyes. Thrilling, he said. I reckon I've been stressing over this dadgum anniversary dinner for the past few months now, replied Bruce, curling forward, bending elbow to knee. Onyx squinted and tilted his head. My, that's quite the odd thing to stress about now, isn't it? Ah, shoot, Brooksy. It ain't that odd for me, blithered Bruce, swaying. I had plans on taking her out to good old reliable Ronaldo's place tonight. Ma, Ronaldo's. Excellent choice. But I reckon the whole plan went tits up, and Ronaldo himself called me last night canceling the dang-up dinner on me. My, Bruce, such a shame, replied Onyx softly, though who wasn't sad in the slightest. After all, potentially Bonnie and Bruce breakup was merely a good thing. He edged the paper closer to Bruce, who was still busy pouting like a fat cowboy ragdoll in the seat. What am I going to do, Brooksy? I got to make tonight perfect, said Bruce, red-faced and gushing. A stabbing hard cough almost caused Onyx to think that Bruce was laughing, though Bruce wasn't. What am I going to do? Groaned Bruce. Onyx glanced at the paper. He huffed. First off, calm yourself down, he ordered. Bruce sniffed, wiping a tear. Secondly, get yourself together. Bruce sniffed, yet wiggled taller in the seat. Thirdly, your solution is apparent, my old friend. And I'm actually quite surprised that you didn't already think of it, continued Onyx snootily. Bruce sniffed, gawking at him. It is? Onyx wagging his head to the beat of a scoffing chuckle. Of course it is. You. Bruce gazing at him with wide and glossy brown eyes. He gulped. You simply do it yourself, he said. Bruce flung a hand, disinterested. But I can't cook, Brooksy, you know that. Onyx sat silent. That's why I called up Ronaldo's, Bruce continued. Good old reliable Ronaldo's. Huh, pard? I reckon they wasn't so reliable this time, huh? Onyx sitting silent, staring at Bruce. What? Said Bruce, shrugging. Onyx shutting his eyes slow and opening them. Bruce, he said softly, do you mean to tell me that all this stress you've been having for the past few months is merely a consequence of your utter lack of ambition to cook? Bruce shrugged, frowning. It's our 10-year anniversary, Brooksy. It ain't gonna be no normal dinner. It's gotta be extravagant. Onyx hammered the table. It doesn't matter what kind of dinner it is, Bruce, he said. What matters is your lack of ambition to do it. Lack of ambition to learn what? To learn how to do it. Lack of ambition to learn what? Cook an extravagant dinner? Anything having to do with dinner, said Onyx under flailing arms. You really think I can cook an extravagant dinner? Yes, Bruce, I do, obviously, Bruce smirked blissfully. Dadgum, Brooksy, I reckon you're right. Onyx's eyes rolled back. Thank you, he said, sighing, dropping to his seat. Now, let us finally discuss I'm going to learn how to cook an extravagant dinner, said Bruce, born-again bone steel, rising up from the seat. What? Said Onyx. I'm going to learn how to cook, today, and I'm going to make Bonnie the best dadgum meal she's ever eaten. Onyx's eyes stretched wide. My shit, he thought to himself. Bruce, no, you can't. I reckon I can, Brooksy, and I reckon I believe in myself, and I reckon I got you to thank for it. But what about the trial? Replied Onyx hopelessly. Afraid I ain't got time today, Brooksy. I got to get home and please my woman, said Bruce, twirling around. But the trial, cried Onyx to deaf ears. Bruce sprung out the office door, and who very much bothered shutting the door closed. Whack! Onyx closed his eyes, scrunching his face like standing in a blast of wind. He sighed, puckered and rolled his lips, curling his eyebrows, dipping his chin, gazing at the Conway file resting heavy atop his desk, and felt like his shoulders. He had far much work to get done, foolishly thinking that Bruce would have worked with him that day. Onyx scoffed. Bruce will simply have to make up for it, I suppose. He said this because he needed Bruce to be just as well prepared for the trial as he was, you see, for the trial was too important, and losing not an option. Onyx snatched up the Conway file, rocketing up from his seat. He marched across the office, out the door, soon out the tower building itself, hastily striding right, a glare in his bright eye. He could hardly fathom the grave misfortune that lay ahead for him as well as for others. He glanced both ways, ducked into an alleyway. He vanished. Thank you for listening.